"Heal my body, I'll marry you," said the disabled mountain man. And what the poor virgin did next shocked an entire frontier town. High in the snow-buried Rockies, a broken man, crippled, bitter, and alone, opens his cabin door to a starving young woman begging for mercy. He thinks she's a thief, until she kneels beside his fire and whispers a prayer that stirs something he thought was long dead. Then he makes a promise no sane man would make: heal his ruined body, and he'll make her his wife. But as her faith begins to mend more than his limbs, whispers spread through town. A preacher's wrath, a burned church, a secret that could strip them of everything they've built, body, soul, and home. When the flames rise and the townsfolk turn, will her mercy still heal what hatred broke? Or will love itself be the price they pay for a miracle no one believed possible? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The winter wind howled through the San Juan Mountains like a wounded beast. Inside his rough-hewn cabin, Santiago Creed limped around the cramped space, checking the rags stuffed in window cracks. His bad leg dragged behind him, a constant reminder of the mine collapse that had changed his life forever. Outside, the blizzard raged fiercer than any he'd seen in his 38 years on this earth. "Cursed weather," he muttered, tossing another log into the pot-bellied stove. The iron door creaked as he shut it, and sparks danced up the stovepipe. Cursed mountains. Cursed life. The cabin was his fortress against the world, built by his own hands after the accident. Simple furnishings filled the space: a narrow cot, a three-legged table, and shelves lined with preserved food and trapping supplies. A single oil lamp cast wavering shadows on the log walls. Santiago's weathered face grimaced as he eased himself onto his wooden chair. His leg always ached worse in the cold, and tonight the pain gnawed deep into the bone. He pulled a worn blanket around his shoulders, listening to the wind's mournful song. Then he heard it, a sound so faint he thought he'd imagined it. A soft tapping at his door, barely audible above the storm. Not the sharp rap of a man's knuckles, but something weaker, desperate. "Who'd be fool enough?" he growled, reaching for his crutch. The tapping came again, fainter this time. The wooden floor creaked under his uneven steps as he made his way to the door. Wind whistled through the cracks, carrying stinging particles of ice. Santiago hesitated, his hand on the latch. The last thing he needed was company, especially on a night like this. But something, call it instinct, or perhaps a shadow of the man he used to be, made him pull the door open. The wind nearly tore it from his grasp. There, collapsed in a drift of snow, lay a woman. Her dark cloak was crusted with ice, and her hands, blue with cold, clutched a small leather-bound Bible. Her face was as pale as the snow around her. "Lord Almighty," Santiago breathed. He stood frozen for a moment, shocked by the sight. Then survival instinct took over. Propping his crutch against the wall, he bent awkwardly and grabbed her under the arms. "You're trespassing, woman," he grunted as he dragged her inside. "This ain't no way station." But even as the harsh words left his lips, he knew he couldn't turn her back out into the storm. That would be murder. Plain and simple. The door slammed shut behind them, cutting off the howling wind. The woman lay motionless on his floor, snow melting around her still form. Santiago's leg screamed in protest as he knelt beside her. "Miss?" He touched her cheek, ice cold. "Miss, can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered, but she didn't respond. The Bible slipped from her frozen fingers, falling open to reveal neat handwriting on the flyleaf. Emily Hartwell. "Well, Miss Hartwell," Santiago muttered, "you've picked a fine night to go wandering." He began working at the frozen buttons of her cloak. The wet wool was heavy as lead as he pulled it away from her body. Beneath it, her dress was soaked through. Common sense warred with propriety. She'd freeze to death in those wet clothes, but the thought of undressing an unconscious woman made him hesitate. In the end, survival won out. He left her in her chemise and petticoat, covering her quickly with every buffalo hide and blanket he owned. His movements were awkward but efficient as he built up the fire in the stove. Years of living alone had taught him to work around his disability. Soon, welcome heat filled the cabin. He set water to boil and gathered pine needles from his store of medicinals. Not that he had much use for them himself these days. As he worked, he kept glancing at his unexpected guest. She was young, probably in her early 20s, with delicate features and dark hair escaping from its pins. What was she doing up here alone? No sensible woman would travel these mountains in winter, especially with a storm brewing. The water came to a boil, and he added a handful of pine needles. The sharp, clean scent filled the cabin as the tea steeped. Santiago poured some into his only cup and limped back to where Emily lay. Awkwardly, he slipped an arm under her shoulders, lifting her head. "Here now, Miss Hartwell. Try to drink this." Her eyes opened slightly, revealing a flash of brown. Her lips moved, forming words he could barely hear. "Looking. For work. Honest work?" "Shh," he said, more gruffly than he intended. "Drink first. Talk later." She managed a few sips before her head lolled against his arm. But her breathing seemed stronger, and some color had returned to her cheeks. Santiago eased her back onto his buffalo robes, tucking the blankets more securely around her. He retrieved her Bible from where it had fallen and placed it on the table. Then he settled into his chair to keep vigil, watching the rise and fall of her breathing. The storm raged on outside, but inside the cabin, an unexpected peace descended. Santiago's leg throbbed, reminding him of all the reasons he'd chosen solitude. Women brought complications, and complications brought pain. He'd learned that lesson well enough in the years since the accident. But as he watched Emily Hartwell sleep, something stirred in his hardened heart. Something he thought had died in that mine collapse years ago. Mercy. Simple human mercy. He didn't want it, didn't ask for it. But there it was, as real as the woman sleeping under his buffalo robes. And try as he might, he couldn't quite summon back the bitterness that had been his constant companion for so long. Hours passed. Santiago dozed fitfully in his chair, waking often to check on his guest and add wood to the stove. The pine needle tea grew cold in the cup. Outside, the blizzard slowly spent its fury until only occasional gusts rattled the window panes. Near dawn, Emily stirred again. This time when her eyes opened, they were clearer, more focused. She looked around the cabin in confusion before her gaze settled on Santiago. "Where?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "You're safe," he said, keeping his voice neutral. "Though what possessed you to be out in such weather, I can't imagine." She tried to sit up but fell back weakly. "I was trying to reach Silver Creek. They said in town there might be work there." "Silver Creek's 20 miles south," Santiago said. "You're lucky you found my cabin when you did. Another hour in that storm." He left the sentence unfinished. A faint blush colored her cheeks. "I'm grateful, sir. Truly. I don't mean to be a burden." "Humph." Santiago shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Well, you're here now, and that's that. Rest while you can. Storm's passing, but the trail won't be safe for a few days yet." He saw fear flash across her face at those words, quickly hidden. What was she running from, he wondered, that made a few days' delay so frightening? But it wasn't his business. He had enough troubles of his own without taking on someone else's. Emily's eyes had already drifted closed again, exhaustion claiming her. Santiago watched her sleep, his thoughts troubled. He'd saved her life, yes, but what then? He was ill-equipped to play host to a young woman, and his hermit's heart rebelled at the thought of company. And yet, as the first pale light of dawn crept through his windows, Santiago found himself reaching for his coffee pot with unusual care, trying not to let the metal clang against the stove. Let her sleep, he thought. The world and its troubles would find her soon enough. The morning sun broke through the clouds, making the snow-covered mountains gleam like polished silver. Inside the cabin, Emily Hartwell slept peacefully under buffalo robes, while a crippled ex-trapper kept watch, surprised to find that mercy, once given, had a way of changing not just the recipient, but the giver as well. Morning crept into the cabin like a timid guest. Brittle sunlight filtered through frost-glazed windows, casting weak shadows across the rough-hewn logs. Emily stirred beneath the pile of buffalo robes, her head swimming with fever. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was. The unfamiliar scent of pine smoke and leather filled her nose. She blinked, trying to focus. A pot clinked against cast iron, and she turned her head to see a man working at a wood stove. Memory rushed back, the blinding snow, her frozen hands, a gruff voice in the darkness. This must be her rescuer. Emily pushed herself to sitting, fighting a wave of dizziness. "Good morning, sir," she said softly. "I don't know how to thank you for saving my life." Santiago turned from the stove, his face set in a scowl. He balanced on a crude wooden crutch, his left leg twisted at an awkward angle. "No need for thanks," he muttered. "Couldn't leave you to freeze is all." He limped to the table, setting down a pot of something that smelled like corn mush. Emily noticed how he favored his bad leg, compensating with practiced movements. Her gaze drifted to the shelves lining one wall, where dozens of glass jars held dried plants and roots, a solitary man's pharmacy, gathered over years alone. "Please," she said, "let me help with breakfast." She stood carefully, steadying herself against the wall. "Sit," he ordered. "You're white as paper." His tone was harsh, but she caught a flicker of concern in his eyes. Emily sank back onto the buffalo robe. "At least tell me your name, sir. I'm Emily Hartwell." He paused in spooning mush into tin bowls. "Santiago Creed." After a moment, he added, "Most folks just call me Creed." "Mr. Creed," she acknowledged. "I'm truly grateful for your kindness." He snorted. "Wasn't kindness, just common decency." He handed her a bowl and a strip of jerky. "Eat. You need your strength." The mush was plain but hot, and Emily realized she was famished. They ate in silence while morning light strengthened outside. Snow hissed against the door in fits and starts, driven by a fitful wind. When she finished, Emily stood again, more steady this time. "Please let me earn my keep while I'm here. I can mend, clean, cook, anything you need." Santiago's face darkened. "Don't need help. Been managing fine these past 5 years." "Even so," Emily persisted gently, "I'd feel better if I could contribute something." She glanced meaningfully at the dusty corners and cluttered shelves. "Perhaps just some light sweeping?" He studied her for a long moment, then shrugged. "Broom's behind the door. Don't overtax yourself." Emily found the broom and began working carefully around the edges of the cabin. Santiago watched her for a few minutes, then limped to his workbench, where half-carved pieces of wood lay scattered. The scratch of his knife and the soft swish of the broom filled the silence. As she worked, Emily took in more details of her temporary sanctuary. The cabin was solidly built, but showed signs of long neglect. Cobwebs draped the ceiling beams. Dishes were stacked haphazardly on rough shelves. A layer of dust covered everything except the workbench and stove. Most interesting were the herb jars. Emily recognized many of the plants: yarrow, chamomile, willow bark. Her mother had taught her their uses before she died, knowledge Emily had expanded during her apprenticeship with the town midwife. The sight of them stirred memories both sweet and painful. By midday, she had swept half the cabin. Her fever made her moves slower than usual, but the simple work felt good. Santiago remained absorbed in his carving, though she noticed him watching her when he thought she wasn't looking. "You should rest," he said abruptly, breaking the silence. "You're swaying on your feet." Emily realized he was right. The room had started to spin slightly. "Perhaps just for a moment," she agreed, sinking onto a wooden chair. He got up and poured her a cup of water from a ceramic jug. The gesture seemed to surprise them both. Emily accepted it with a quiet, "Thank you." The afternoon passed slowly. Snow continued to fall outside, though with less fury than the previous night. Emily dozed in the chair while Santiago worked. Occasionally she heard him muttering to himself as he carved, words too low to make out. As evening approached, she roused herself to help with supper. Santiago protested but eventually allowed her to slice jerky and heat beans. They ate by lamplight, the wind's moan a constant companion. "The storm's easing," Santiago observed. "Trail might be passable in a few days." Emily nodded, though her heart clenched at the thought of leaving. Where would she go? Silver Creek seemed impossibly far now, and she couldn't return to— No, better not to think of that. Later, after Santiago had settled into his bed near the stove, Emily knelt in the darkness. The cabin's shadows pressed close as she bowed her head. "Lord," she whispered, "thank you for bringing me to this place, to this man. He's angry and hurting, but he showed mercy when I needed it most. Please help me find a way to thank him, and please—" She hesitated. "Please help him find peace." The night deepened. Emily lay awake on her buffalo robe, listening to Santiago's breathing. Sometimes it hitched, and she heard him shift, as if his injured leg pained him even in sleep. She thought of the willow bark in those dusty jars. Perhaps tomorrow she could find a way to help, if he would let her. Dawn arrived with clearing skies. While Santiago slept, Emily began quietly organizing the cabin. She straightened the herb jars, noting which remedies were present. Willow bark for pain, comfrey for healing, medicines she had used countless times in her former life. The familiar work centered her, gave her purpose. She was examining a jar of dried elderberries when Santiago stirred. He sat up, blinking at the altered space. "What are you doing?" I demanded, reaching for his crutch. "Just tidying a bit," Emily said calmly. "You have quite a collection of herbs here. Do you use them often?" His face closed off. "Used to. Don't bother much anymore." Emily nodded, setting down the jar. "That's a shame. Willow bark tea might help with the pain in your leg." "Don't need help," he growled, but she saw him eye the jar thoughtfully. She turned to the stove, giving him space. "I'll start breakfast, if you'll allow it." He grunted what she took for assent. While she worked, she felt his gaze on her back, measuring, considering. The silence between them felt different somehow. Less brittle, more contemplative. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds, making the snow-covered world gleam. Inside, Emily stirred the morning's corn mush and sent up another silent prayer of gratitude. She was alive, she was safe, and for now, that was enough. The rest, including the mystery of this wounded man who had saved her, would unfold in God's own time. She glanced at Santiago, who was attempting to smooth his sleep-mussed hair. Despite his gruff manner, she had seen glimpses of the man he must have been before bitterness took root. Perhaps, with patience and grace, she could help that man emerge again. But for now, she simply poured 2 bowls of mush and set them on the table. "Breakfast is ready, Mr. Creed." He looked up, surprise flickering across his weathered face. For a moment, something softened in his eyes. Then it was gone, hidden behind his usual scowl. But Emily had seen it, that brief crack in his armor. It gave her hope. They ate in what had become their customary silence, while morning light filled the cabin with promise. The storm had passed, but its effects lingered, in the fresh snow outside, in Emily's lingering fever, and most importantly, in the small miracle of 2 lonely souls finding unexpected shelter together. The storm raged for 3 more days, trapping Emily and Santiago in their uneasy coexistence. Each morning brought the same routine. Emily would sweep, organize, and cook while Santiago worked at his bench, the silence broken only by the howl of wind and occasional muttered instructions. On the 4th morning, Emily woke before dawn. Her fever had finally broken, leaving her clear-headed and restless. The cabin was quiet, except for Santiago's deep breathing and the pop of embers in the stove. Perfect timing for what she'd been planning. She moved carefully in the dim light, gathering items she'd noticed during her cleaning. Dried comfrey leaves, yarrow flowers, and precious willow bark. Her fingers remembered the motions as she crushed the herbs, mixing them with rendered bear fat she'd found in a dusty jar. The familiar scents of healing filled the air. Sharp yarrow, sweet comfrey, bitter willow. Emily worked quickly, stirring the mixture over the stove's gentle heat. She was so focused on her task that she didn't hear Santiago's breathing change. "What are you doing?" His voice made her jump. She turned to find him propped up on one elbow, watching her through narrowed eyes. "I'm making a healing salve," she said simply, continuing to stir. "For your leg." Santiago's face darkened. He grabbed his crutch and levered himself upright, jaw clenched against the morning stiffness. "Didn't ask for your help." "No," Emily agreed, adding more willow bark to the mixture. "But you need it. I've seen how you suffer, especially when the weather changes." "I manage fine." His voice carried a warning, but Emily held her ground. "There's no shame in accepting help, Mr. Creed. God provides ways to ease our burdens, if we're willing to—" "God?" Santiago barked out a laugh that held no humor. "Where was God when the mine collapsed? When good men died screaming? When this—" He slapped his twisted leg. "Took everything I'd worked for?" Emily set down her spoon, facing him fully. "He was there. Sometimes we're too angry to see his hand at work, but he never abandons us." Pretty words from someone who's never lost everything. Santiago's voice was bitter as winter wind. "You think I haven't known loss?" Emily's quiet words carried weight. "My mother died when I was 12. My father—" She swallowed hard. "I've learned that God often works through other people's hands, through healing herbs and kindness freely given." Santiago opened his mouth to argue, but pain chose that moment to strike. His leg buckled, sending him stumbling against the wall. Emily moved to help, but he waved her away, face gray with agony. "Damn this useless leg!" The words burst from him like steam from a kettle. Then, shocking them both, he added, "Heal my body, and I'll marry you." The proposal hung in the air between them, as heavy as storm clouds. Emily's hand stilled on the pot of salve. She studied Santiago's face, expecting to find mockery, but saw only raw desperation. And something else. Hope, perhaps, or fear of hope. Mr. Creed, she said carefully, marriage isn't a business arrangement. Isn't it? His laugh was harsh. What else brings two strangers together? You need shelter and protection. I need... He gestured at his leg, then at the neat cabin that showed Emily's touch. This. Someone to make this place livable again. Someone who knows healing. Emily's heart beat fast against her ribs. She thought of her options. The long, dangerous road to Silver Creek, or worse, returning to face Reverend Calloway's mercy. At least here she could be useful, and Santiago, for all his gruffness, had shown her kindness when it mattered most. If I agree, she said slowly, there would be conditions. Santiago's eyebrows rose. What conditions? First, you must let me treat your leg properly. No more stubbornness about accepting help. He nodded grudgingly. Second, Emily took a deep breath. You must let me pray for you. With you. Santiago's face closed like a shutter. Prayer's a waste of breath. Then you'll waste breath with me, or there's no deal. Emily surprised herself with her firmness. I won't live in a home without faith. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the pop of the stove and the distant keening of wind. Santiago stared at her, something shifting in his dark eyes. Finally, he gave a single, sharp nod. Fine. Prayers and poultices. But I expect results. God works in his own time, Emily cautioned, but I promise to do my best with the knowledge he's given me. She turned back to her salve, adding a pinch more yarrow. Sit down and let me tend to your leg. To her surprise, Santiago complied, lowering himself onto a chair. His hands gripped the seat as Emily knelt beside him, carefully rolling up his pant leg. The sight made her catch her breath. The old injury was worse than she'd imagined. Twisted muscle and badly healed bone, all knotted with scar tissue. No wonder he was in constant pain. Bad, ain't it? Santiago's voice was gruff. I've seen worse heal. Emily lied gently. She scooped up some of the warm salve, its pungent scent filling the air. This will help with the pain and stiffness. Hold still. As she worked the medicine into his scarred flesh, Emily began to pray softly. Lord, guide my hands in healing. Ease this good man's pain and help him find peace in your mercy. Santiago snorted at good man, but didn't stop her. His rigid posture gradually relaxed as the salve's warmth seeped in, easing the morning's tension. There, Emily said finally, wiping her hands on a clean rag. We'll do this twice daily, and I'll make a tea for you to drink as well, with time and faith. And marriage, Santiago interrupted. His face was unreadable. You haven't actually agreed yet. Emily sat back on her heels, studying him. The morning light caught silver threads in his dark hair, lines of pain and loneliness etched deep in his face. Not a handsome man, perhaps, but one who had shown honor when it mattered. Yes, she said simply. I agree to marry you, Santiago Creed. God willing, we'll help each other heal. Something flickered in his weather-worn face. Hope, breaking through like sunlight after storm. He didn't smile exactly, but some of the bitterness eased from his expression. Well then, he said gruffly. Reckon we'd best get used to using first names, though I still don't hold with all this praying business. You will, Emily said, rising to check her pot of salve. In time. Santiago watched her work, absently rubbing his treated leg. Starting to feel better already, he admitted grudgingly. Maybe there's something to your herbs after all. It's not just the herbs, Emily said quietly. Sometimes the first step in healing is allowing someone to help. She began pouring the salve into small jars, movements sure and practiced. We all need healing of one kind or another. Santiago's grunt might have been agreement. Outside, the wind's voice had softened, and weak sunlight filtered through the cabin's windows. Emily sent up a silent prayer of gratitude. This wasn't the future she'd imagined, but perhaps it was the one she needed, a chance to serve God by helping this wounded man find his way back to faith and hope. As she worked, Santiago cleared his throat. "Emily?" She looked up, struck by how different her name sounded in his voice. "Thank you," he said roughly. He gestured at his leg, at the organized cabin, at everything that had changed since she'd arrived. Emily smiled, hope warming her heart. It wasn't a conventional courtship, but then, nothing about their situation was conventional. God worked in mysterious ways, bringing healing through unexpected paths. "You're welcome," she said simply, and turned back to her work as morning light filled the cabin with promise. The mountain spring arrived like a hesitant guest, testing its welcome with timid sunbeams and tentative warmth. Inside Santiago's cabin, a different kind of thaw was taking place. Emily settled into a daily rhythm, rising before dawn to stoke the stove and prepare Santiago's healing tea. She'd gather her supplies: willow bark for pain, comfrey for mending, and yarrow to strengthen. The kettle's whistle became a morning bell, calling Santiago from his restless dreams. "More of your witch's brew?" he'd grumble, but his protests lacked their former bite. Emily would smile, measuring careful spoonfuls into his tin cup. "God's gifts aren't witchcraft, Mr. Creed. Santiago," she corrected herself, still adjusting to the intimacy of first names. "These plants were put here for our use." One morning, while warming poultices near the hearth, Emily began telling stories of her father's travels. "He once rode 3 days through summer storm to reach a dying man," she said, carefully spreading the hot cloth over Santiago's twisted leg. "Found him in a cabin much like this one, alone and afraid. And I reckon your father saved him with prayer." Santiago's tone was skeptical, but he leaned forward, drawn into the tale. Emily's hands moved steadily, working the medicine into scarred flesh. "No, the man died. But he didn't die alone, and he found peace before the end." She looked up, meeting Santiago's dark eyes. "Sometimes healing isn't about saving the body." Santiago fell quiet, considering her words. The fire crackled softly, and outside, melting snow dripped from the eaves. Emily kept careful notes in her small leather journal, recording every change in Santiago's condition. "Your muscle tone is improving," she told him, writing by lamplight. "The scar tissue seems less rigid." "Still hurts like the devil," Santiago muttered, but there was less bitterness in his voice. "Pain can be a sign of healing," Emily replied. She began to sing softly as she worked, an old hymn about grace and restoration. Her clear voice filled the cabin's shadows with warmth. "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound." Santiago watched her from his chair, something shifting in his weather-worn face. When she reached the verse about being lost and found, a ghost of a smile touched his lips, the first she'd seen. The days lengthened, sun growing stronger. Emily took to chopping wood in the afternoons, despite Santiago's protests that it wasn't proper work for a woman. "Proper won't keep us warm," she replied firmly, swinging the axe with practiced strokes. Her arms had grown stronger since arriving, her hands tougher. From his window, Santiago watched her work. Her determination stirred something in him. Admiration, perhaps, or recognition of a spirit as stubborn as his own. She'd shed her heavy coat in the spring warmth, and her movements were sure and steady. When she paused to wipe her brow, he found himself studying the grace in her work-roughened hands, the quiet strength in her bearing. One afternoon, as Emily massaged his leg with her healing salve, Santiago felt something new. a faint tingling where there had been only numbness before. He jerked upright, startling Emily. "What's wrong?" she asked, concern crossing her face. "I felt—" He stopped, afraid to name it, as if speaking might break the spell. There was feeling, just for a moment. Emily's eyes lit up. "That's wonderful. It means the circulation is improving." She made a note in her journal, then smiled up at him. "See what happens when you let someone help?" Santiago grunted, but pleasure warmed his voice. "Reckon you might be right. About some things, anyway." That evening, Emily baked cornbread in the cast-iron skillet, filling the cabin with homey scents. Santiago watched her work, noting how naturally she moved through his space now, as if she belonged there. When she served him a golden piece, still warm from the pan, he took a bite and murmured, "Tastes like mercy." Emily's cheeks flushed pink in the lamplight. Their eyes met across the rough-hewn table, and something shifted in the air between them. No longer just healer and patient, but a man and woman sharing bread and quiet possibility. Later, as shadows lengthened and the lamp burned low, they sat in comfortable silence. Emily mended one of Santiago's shirts while he whittled a piece of pine, his hands remembering old skills. The evening held a gentle warmth, like a blanket drawn close against mountain chill. "Tell me another story," Santiago said suddenly, surprising them both. "About your father's travels." Emily's needle stilled. "Are you sure? You usually complain about my preaching." "Well, seems I'm developing a tolerance." His eyes crinkled slightly. "Like building up resistance to your bitter medicines?" Emily laughed softly, and Santiago found himself smiling in response. A real smile this time, rusty but genuine. She began a tale about her father finding a lost child in the hills, and Santiago settled back in his chair, let her voice wash over him. The lamp's glow softened their faces, hiding the marks life had left on both of them, his scars, her shadows. For a moment, they were just two souls sharing light against the darkness, finding unexpected comfort in each other's presence. Emily wove faith through her stories naturally as breathing, but Santiago found he minded less now. Her belief wasn't the harsh judgment he'd feared, but something gentler, more like the spring sun slowly melting winter's grip, or her healing hands easing his pain. When she rose to bank the fire for the night, Santiago watched her movements with new awareness. This woman who'd stumbled half-frozen into his life had brought more than physical healing. She'd brought order to his chaos, warmth to his coldness, and something he'd thought long dead. Hope. "Emily," he said quietly, testing her name like a prayer. She turned, lamplight catching gold in her hair. "Yes?" Words failed him then, but something in his face made her smile softly, understanding what he couldn't say. "I know," she replied simply. "God works in mysterious ways." Santiago didn't argue this time. He was beginning to understand that some mysteries were worth embracing, like the mystery of how a preacher's daughter with healing hands could make a broken man feel whole again. Outside, spring winds whispered through melting snow. Inside, two people who'd started as strangers shared the warm circle of lamplight, no longer quite so alone. The evening stretched soft around them, full of unspoken possibilities and the quiet miracle of hearts beginning to thaw. Emily returned to her mending, humming an old hymn under her breath. Santiago closed his eyes, letting the peace of the moment wash over him. His leg still ached, but differently now, like something healing rather than dying, like hope taking root in frozen ground. The lamp burned steady, casting their shadows on the cabin walls, no longer separate but intertwined. Through the window, stars began to prick through the darkening sky, witnesses to the slow transformation taking place below. A transformation measured not just in healing flesh, but in softening hearts and rekindled faith. The April sun worked steadily at winter's remains, revealing the world beneath. One morning, Emily spotted something through the cabin window, a dark line snaking through melting snow. "Santiago," she called, excitement in her voice. "There's a wagon track showing." He limped to join her, squinting at the revealed path. "That'll be the old supply route to Silverton." His voice held wariness. "Town's about 4 miles down." Emily's hands twisted in her apron. "We're running low on flour and salt." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I could make the trip, bring back supplies." Santiago frowned, studying her face. They'd fallen into an easy rhythm these past weeks, her presence becoming as natural as the pine smell of his cabin. The thought of her leaving, even briefly, made his chest tighten. "It's safe enough now the snow's melting," Emily added softly, "and we can't live on pine tea forever." Santiago ran a hand through his graying hair. "Reckon you're right about that." He sighed heavily. "Old Bess is in the lean-to. She ain't much for looks, but she's sure-footed." Emily's face brightened. "You'd trust me with your mule?" "Trust you with more than that by now," he muttered, then cleared his throat. "But you promise me you'll be back by dusk. Trail gets treacherous after dark." "I promise." Emily touched his arm briefly. "I'll be careful." Santiago watched her prepare for the journey, efficient movements masking what he sensed was nervous energy. She packed dried herbs to trade, tucked her small Bible into her pocket, and wrapped herself in her now mended coat. In the lean-to, Old Bess greeted Emily with twitching ears. The mule was weather-beaten but sturdy, like everything else in Santiago's world. Emily checked the saddle straps just as Santiago had taught her, his gruff instructions now second nature. "Remember," Santiago called as she mounted, "stay on the main track, don't talk to—" He stopped himself, realizing how much he sounded like a worried husband. "Just come back safe." Emily nodded, nudging Bess forward. The morning air held spring's promise, and the track, though muddy, was clear enough. She glanced back once to see Santiago standing in his doorway, leaning on his crutch, watching until she disappeared around the bend. The ride to Silverton took just over an hour. Old Bess picked her way carefully through patches of melting snow, hooves making soft sucking sounds in the mud. Emily's heart began to pound as wooden buildings came into view, her first glimpse of civilization since the storm that had brought her to Santiago's door. Silverton was a mining town, raw and unfinished. Board sidewalks lined the muddy main street, and somewhere a blacksmith's hammer rang against iron. Emily tied Bess outside the mercantile, patting the mule's nose before stepping inside. The store's bell jingled, announcing her presence. Dust motes danced in shaft of sunlight, and the familiar smell of leather, coffee, and dried goods wrapped around her. Behind the counter, a weathered man with spectacles looked up from his ledger. "Morning, miss," he said. "Don't believe I've seen you before." "Just passing through," Emily replied, forcing steadiness into her voice. She began selecting what they needed: flour, salt, coffee, a few precious sugar cubes for Santiago's birthday next week. As she browsed, other customers entered. Their whispers reached her ears like the rustle of dead leaves. "Preacher's girl. Reverend Calloway's assistant. Ran off in the night." Ice formed in Emily's stomach. She hadn't thought news would travel this far west, but frontier towns thrived on gossip. With trembling hands, she placed her herbs on the counter. "Would you trade these for supplies?" Her voice sounded strange to her own ears. The shopkeeper examined the carefully tied bundles. Good quality. Medicine herbs, ain't they? At her nod, he named a fair price in trade. Emily completed the transaction as quickly as she could, painfully aware of the whispers growing behind her. She felt eyes on her back as she loaded her purchases into Bess's saddlebags, her movements quick but controlled. Only when Silverton disappeared behind her did Emily let out the breath she'd been holding. Tears blurred her vision, but she blinked them away. The track home seemed longer, each step bringing back memories she'd tried to bury. The sun was lowering, but hadn't yet touched the mountains when she reached Santiago's cabin. He must have been watching for her because the door opened before she'd finished dismounting. "You're back early," he said, relief evident in his voice. Emily nodded, unable to trust her speech. She began unpacking the supplies with shaking hands. Santiago studied her, his dark eyes missing nothing. Something happened in town. It wasn't a question. Emily carried the purchases inside, trying to busy herself with storing them away. But when Santiago limped closer, his presence steady and waiting, the words spilled out. "They knew me," she whispered. "Or knew of me. Reverend Calloway's runaway assistant." Santiago's face hardened. "Calloway, the preacher you worked for?" Emily nodded, wrapping her arms around herself. "I was his housekeeper, helped with his correspondence. He said he was teaching me discipline, that my willful nature needed correction." Her voice cracked. "The discipline grew cruel. He would quote scripture while—" She stopped, unable to continue. Santiago's hands gripped his crutch until his knuckles went white. "Did he beat you?" He called it penance. Emily's words were barely audible. "Said my father's death left me without proper guidance, that God had sent him to correct my path." She drew a shuddering breath. "One night, after he'd been drinking communion wine, he came to my room. I ran, took nothing but my Bible and what coins I could find." Santiago's jaw clenched, muscles working beneath his beard. The cabin grew very quiet, save for the pop of wood in the stove. "The frontier don't forgive easy," he finally said, voice rough with emotion. "People out here, they're quick to judge, slow to forget." He moved closer, until Emily could feel the warmth of him beside her. "But you're safe here. You understand? Nobody's laying a hand on you while I draw breath." Emily looked up at him, seeing the fierce protectiveness in his weathered face. For the first time since fleeing into that winter night, she felt truly safe. Without thinking, she stepped forward and pressed her face against his chest. His free arm came around her, strong and sure. "I believe you," she whispered. They stood like that as the sun sank behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the cabin floor. Outside, old Bess nickered softly in her lean-to, and a spring breeze carried the scent of melting snow and new grass through the open door. Santiago's heart thundered beneath Emily's ear, his touch gentle despite the strength she knew he possessed. In that moment she understood that healing flowed both ways between them, her hands mending his body, his presence mending her spirit. When Emily finally stepped back, wiping her eyes, Santiago's expression was softer than she'd ever seen it. "Best get supper started," he said gruffly, but his hand lingered on her shoulder. "Reckon we could both use some of that cornbread you make." Emily managed a watery smile. "I bought sugar today. Maybe I'll make it sweet this time." "Waste of good sugar," Santiago grumbled, but his eyes crinkled at the corners. "Though I suppose after a day like this, we've earned a treat." As Emily moved around the cabin, preparing their evening meal, she felt lighter despite the fear her trip to town had stirred. She had spoken her secret aloud, and instead of judgment, she'd found protection. Instead of condemnation, acceptance. Santiago settled in his chair by the stove, watching her work. The silence between them was comfortable now, filled with unspoken understanding. When Emily began to hum softly, a habit she'd nearly lost during her time with Reverend Calloway, Santiago closed his eyes and listened, his face peaceful in the fading light. The aroma of baking cornbread filled the cabin, sweet and warming. Outside, dusk painted the mountains in shades of purple and gold, while inside, two wounded souls found healing in simple things: shared bread, gentle words, and the promise of safety freely given. The mountain morning dawned clear and crisp, spring sun warming the lingering patches of snow. Emily stood at the cabin window, kneading bread dough while watching chickadees flit between pine branches. Santiago sat nearby, whittling a new handle for his axe, his bad leg propped on a stool she'd padded with an old quilt. The peaceful scene shattered when 3 riders appeared on the wagon track, their horses' hooves breaking through crusty snow. Emily's hands stilled in the dough. Even at this distance, she recognized the straight-backed figure in the black coat. "Reverend Calloway," she whispered, color draining from her face. Santiago's head snapped up. Without a word, he grabbed his crutch and rifle, moving to the door with surprising speed despite his limp. Emily's heart hammered against her ribs as she wiped flour from her hands and followed. The riders approached slowly, their horses' breath steaming in the cool air. Reverend Calloway sat his mount like a judge, flanked by 2 rough-looking men Emily didn't recognize. His familiar face, once a source of terror in her nightmares, looked somehow smaller in the mountain daylight. Santiago positioned himself on the cabin's small porch, rifle ready, but pointed downward. Emily stood behind his shoulder, drawing strength from his solid presence. "This here's private property," Santiago called out, his voice carrying clear across the yard. "State your business." Reverend Calloway reined his horse to a stop, looking down his nose at Santiago. "My business, sir, is with the young woman cowering behind you. Emily Hartwell, you've strayed far from the path of righteousness." Emily's fingers curled into fists, but she held her tongue. Santiago shifted his weight, adjusting his grip on the rifle. "The lady ain't interested in talking to you," he said firmly. "Best ride on." The Reverend's face darkened. "That lady is a thief and a sinner. She stole church funds and fled like a common criminal, abandoning her sacred duties to God and congregation." "Lies!" Emily burst out, stepping forward. "I took only what wages you owed me, and you know it." "Silence!" Calloway thundered, his mask of piety slipping. "Your father would weep to see you living in sin with a crippled mountain man. Return with me now, repent, and perhaps the Lord will show mercy." Santiago's jaw tightened. "Only sin I see is a man of God spreading false witness. Emily stays where she chooses. You're not welcome here." One of Calloway's companions spat into the snow. "Reckon the cripple's been bewitched by her pretty face. Heard tell she's got ways of clouding men's minds." "Mind your tongue," Santiago growled, raising the rifle slightly. "Next man speaks ill of her answers to me." Tension crackled like lightning before a storm. Emily's heart thundered so loud she was sure everyone could hear it. The horses shifted nervously, sensing their rider's anger. Reverend Calloway studied them both, his eyes cold as mountain streams. "Very well. Live in your sin together. But remember, God's judgment reaches even these wild places." He turned his horse, then added over his shoulder, "And man's law has a long arm, too." The 3 riders departed, their threats hanging in the clear morning air. Emily waited until they disappeared around the bend before her knees gave way. She sank onto the porch step, shaking. Santiago lowered himself beside her, rifle across his lap, You all right?" "Thank you," she whispered, unable to look at him. "For defending me. For believing me." He turned away, but not before she caught the flash of emotion across his weathered features. "Ain't nothing to thank me for. Man like that, hiding cruelty behind scripture, makes me sick." They sat in silence, watching spring clouds drift across the peaks. Emily's bread dough would be over-risen, but she couldn't bring herself to move. Santiago's solid presence beside her felt like an anchor in a storm. The day passed in tense watchfulness. Every snapping twig brought Santiago's hand to his rifle. Emily jumped at shadows, remembering too well the Reverend's capacity for vengeful patience. They spoke little, each lost in private fears. As evening approached, they heard the jingle of a horse's bridle. Santiago was on his feet instantly, but it was only young Tommy from the telegraph office, his pony lathered from the climb. "Message for Mr. Creed," the boy called out, waving a yellow envelope. "Pa said it was urgent-like." Santiago took the telegram, pressing a coin into Tommy's hand. Emily watched his face as he read, seeing the color drain from his sun-browned cheeks. "What is it?" she asked softly when the boy had gone. Santiago's hands crumpled the paper. "Mining companies disputing my land claim. Says their survey shows mineral rights extending under this whole valley." He laughed bitterly. "Imagine that. Same day the good Reverend pays his visit." Emily's stomach knotted. "He has influence with the mining companies. He helped negotiate their contracts, handled their legal correspondence." "Should have known he'd strike there." Santiago stumped to his chair by the fire, sinking into it heavily. "Man like that, he'll use any weapon he can reach." Emily busied herself making coffee, giving him space to process. When she brought him a steaming cup, his face was drawn with worry. "This land," he said quietly. "It's all I got left. After the mine collapse, company paid me off with this claim. Said it was worthless for mining, but good enough for a broken man." His laugh held no humor. "Reckon they've changed their minds." "We'll fight it," Emily said firmly. "I know how the Reverend works, how he twists truth to serve his ends. We can prove your claim is valid." "We?" Santiago looked up sharply. "This ain't your fight, Emily. You've got troubles enough." She touched his shoulder gently. "We fight lies with truth. Together." When he started to protest, she added, "I've seen his letters, his contracts. I know where to look for proof of his schemes." Santiago sat silent, firelight playing across his face. Finally, he covered her hand with his own rough one. "Together then," he agreed softly. "Though God knows what storm we're riding into." Outside, wind sighed through the pines, carrying the first hint of thunder from distant peaks. Emily felt Santiago's shoulder tense under her hand, saw the doubt clouding his eyes as he stared into the flames. The Reverend's threats had shaken them both, but somehow his silence now was more frightening than his anger had been. She wanted to comfort Santiago, to promise everything would be all right, but frontier life had taught her the foolishness of easy promises. Instead, she squeezed his shoulder once and went to salvage what she could of her abandoned bread dough. The cabin grew dark except for the firelight. Emily shaped the over-risen dough into biscuits, knowing they'd be tough but unwilling to waste flour. Santiago cleaned his rifle with methodical care, each movement precise despite his troubled thoughts. Neither spoke much, but the silence between them held a new quality, the quiet of two people facing a storm together. When the biscuits were done, they ate them with jerky and the last of the morning's coffee. The food was plain, but Emily noticed Santiago ate every crumb, as if gathering strength for battles ahead. "First light," he said finally. "I need to ride to town. Check the claim office, see what we're up against." Emily nodded. "I'll come with you. The Reverend's Influence runs deep, but so do his secrets. And I know where many of them are buried. Santiago studied her face in the firelight. You're sure? Showing yourself in town after today? I ran once, Emily said quietly. I won't run again. Not from him, not from anyone. A ghost of a smile touched Santiago's lips. Reckon I'm learning why your pa named you Emily. Means industrious, don't it? And striving, she added, managing a small smile of her own. Fits you proper? He shifted in his chair, wincing as his bad leg protested. Well then, best we get some rest. Tomorrow's like to be a long day. Emily banked the fire while Santiago checked the door's heavy bar. The familiar routine felt different tonight, weighted with new purpose. As she spread her blankets on the floor near the hearth, Santiago had long since insisted she take his bed while he slept in his chair. Emily's thoughts turned to prayer. She prayed for strength, for wisdom, for protection. But mostly she prayed for the man whose quiet courage had given her back her own. Santiago's darkness had lightened somewhat during their weeks together, but now storm clouds gathered in his eyes again. She wouldn't let the Reverend destroy his hard-won peace. Santiago's voice broke into her thoughts. Emily? Yes? Thank you, for staying, for… He paused, searching for words. For bringing light back to this place. Emily's heart swelled with emotions she wasn't ready to name. Sleep well, Santiago. And you? He murmured. Soon his breathing deepened into sleep, but Emily lay awake long into the night, listening to the wind and planning how best to protect this man who had protected her. Tomorrow would bring its own battles, but for now, in this moment, they were safe. It would have to be enough. Dawn painted the San Juan peaks in soft gold as Santiago limped onto the cabin's small porch. His twisted leg ached more than usual, warning of weather changes ahead. Or maybe it was just the weight of worry pressing down on him. Emily was already up, her quiet humming drifting through the open door as she stirred porridge over the cook fire. The sound made his chest tight. In just these few weeks, she had brought such life to his lonely home, which made what he had to do even harder. He cleared his throat. Emily, need to talk with you. She appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on her apron. One look at his face and her smile faded. What's wrong? Been thinking all night. He gripped his crutch tighter. You ought to leave. Head somewhere safe, far from here. Emily's chin lifted. No. Listen to me. Reverend Calloway, the mining company, they aim to make trouble. Real trouble. He gestured at his bad leg. I can't protect you proper. I don't need protecting. She stepped onto the porch, her eyes fierce. This is where God set me, Santiago Creed. Right here, helping folks heal. Emily. No. She laid her hand on his arm. I ran once before. It solved nothing. My place is here now, doing the work I was meant to do. Santiago studied her face, so young, yet lined with determination that matched the mountains themselves. You're the most stubborn woman I ever met, he muttered. A smile tugged at her lips. I'll take that as a compliment. Now come eat your porridge before it gets cold. Over breakfast, Emily laid out her plans. She would expand her healing work, gathering herbs and helping those in need. The Ute people who sometimes traded at the cabin knew where the best medicine plants grew. Old Sarah Running Deer showed me a meadow full of yarrow last time she visited, Emily said, eyes bright with purpose. And there's wild mint growing by the creek. Santiago wanted to argue more, but her enthusiasm was hard to resist. Besides, he had seen how the local folks, Indian and white alike, had started coming to her for help with minor ailments. She had a gift for healing, one that went beyond mere herbs and poultices. That very afternoon, proof of her worth arrived in the form of Jake Wheeler, a trapper who had taken a bad fall in the high country. His ankle was swollen to twice its normal size, purple with bruising. Emily worked quickly, cleaning the injury and wrapping it with strips of cloth soaked in yarrow tea. Her hands were gentle but sure as she explained each step to Santiago, who found himself drawn into helping despite his reservations. "Keep it raised and cool," she instructed Jake. "Come back in 3 days so I can check how it's healing." The trapper nodded gratefully. "Much obliged, Miss Emily. Reckon you got the touch, sure enough." After Jake left, Emily turned to Santiago with a knowing look. "Still think I should leave?" He shook his head, smiling despite himself. "Reckon you've made your point." The days that followed settled into a rhythm. Emily's healing work drew more visitors, mothers with sick children, ranch hands with injuries, even a few Ute families who valued her respectful manner as much as her medicines. Santiago watched her work with growing admiration, seeing how she treated everyone with the same careful attention. His own leg was improving too, thanks to her daily treatments. The constant pain had eased enough that he could manage short walks using a crutch. One morning, studying a straight young aspen tree, he got an idea. It took several days of careful work, but finally he had shaped a proper walking cane, smooth and strong. Emily found him testing it in the yard, taking cautious steps without his crutch. "Santiago!" She rushed to steady him as he wobbled slightly. "That's wonderful!" He grinned, pleased by her excitement. Figured it was time for something more dignified than that old crutch. "It's beautiful work." She ran her fingers over the polished wood. "You've always been good with your hands." The pride in her voice warmed him more than the spring sunshine. Together they walked to the edge of the clearing, Santiago learning to trust his new cane, while Emily pointed out the herbs beginning to sprout in the warming earth. Their shared life expanded in other ways, too. Emily's organizing spirit had taken hold, and soon they were planning improvements to the cabin. Santiago taught her basic carpentry, and together they built new shelves for her growing collection of dried herbs and medicines. "Hold it steady now," he instructed, as they fitted another board in place. Emily's small hands gripped the wood firmly while he drove in the nails. Her face was intent with concentration, a smudge of sawdust on her cheek. Santiago had to resist the urge to brush it away. The work was good, but the laughter was better. Emily's quiet humor drew out his own long-buried sense of fun. She teased him about his grumbling, and he played at being offended, all while their eyes danced with shared amusement. Evenings became precious time. They would sit on the porch after supper, watching dusk paint the ridges in purple and gold. Sometimes Emily would sing hymns softly, her clear voice carrying on the evening breeze. Other times they simply sat in comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. One such evening, as they finished a simple meal of rabbit stew and cornbread, Santiago noticed Emily seemed preoccupied. "Something troubling you?" he asked. She hesitated, then pulled a letter from her pocket. "Came with the supply wagon yesterday. It's from Mrs. Henderson in town." Santiago tensed. "What does she say?" "The usual gossip. People talking about us living here together, wondering what sort of arrangement we have." Emily's voice was steady, but her fingers worried at the paper's edge. "She means well, warning us." "And?" Santiago prompted when she fell silent. Emily looked up at him, her eyes clear and determined. "Let them talk." Something in Santiago's chest squeezed tight. This brave, beautiful woman who had stumbled into his life during a blizzard. How had she become so essential to his world? He watched her gather the supper dishes, humming softly to herself, and knew with sudden certainty that he loved her. The realization should have frightened him. Instead, it felt like coming home after a long journey. But the words stuck in his throat, held back by lingering doubt. What could he offer her, really? A crippled ex-trapper with a disputed land claim and too many bitter memories? So he said nothing, just helped her wash the dishes and bank the fire for the night. But his eyes followed her movements, storing up small details like treasure. The way she tucked stray hair behind her ear, how her hands moved surely among her herbs and medicines, the gentle strength in her voice as she spoke to those who came seeking help. That night, lying in his bed, Emily had finally convinced him to stop sleeping in the chair. Santiago stared at the cabin's rough-hewn ceiling. Outside, a whippoorwill called softly in the gathering dark. He thought about Emily's quiet, "Let them talk," and the courage it must have taken to say those words. She had refused to run away from the gossip and threats, choosing instead to build something meaningful here. Her steadfast presence had transformed not just his cabin, but his heart, teaching him that broken things could be mended, that new growth could spring from old wounds. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. The mining company's threat still loomed, and Reverend Calloway's influence cast long shadows. But tonight, Santiago let himself simply feel grateful for the healing that had come to his life, wrapped in the peace of knowing Emily was sleeping safely under his roof. His leg ached less these days, thanks to her care. But it was his spirit that had truly begun to straighten and strengthen, like a bent sapling reaching for the sun. Emily's faith in him, in their shared purpose here, had become his anchor. The aspen cane leaned against his bedpost, its pale wood gleaming faintly in the darkness. Such a simple thing, yet it represented so much. His growing strength, Emily's patient encouragement, their partnership in creating something new from what was broken. Santiago touched the smooth wood, remembering how Emily's eyes had lit up when she first saw it. Maybe someday soon he would find the courage to tell her what was in his heart. For now, he would keep showing her in the ways he knew how, building shelves for her medicines, defending her choices, supporting her work among their neighbors. Sleep came slowly, filled with dreams of Emily's smile and the sound of her hymns floating on the evening air. Whatever storms might come, they would face them together. That thought alone was enough to bring peace to his weathered soul. The mountain air softened as spring took hold of the high country. Snow retreated up the slopes, leaving behind patches of fresh grass and early wildflowers. Emily noticed Santiago spending more time outside, testing his healing leg as he moved around the cabin yard. One bright morning, she found him standing at the base of the gentle slope behind the cabin, leaning on his aspen cane. His face held that determined look she had come to know well. "What are you planning?" she asked, though she already knew. Santiago squared his shoulders. "Time to see what this leg can do." Emily's heart quickened with concern, but she held her tongue. This was his moment. She watched as he planted his feet carefully on the uneven ground. Santiago took a deep breath. Slowly, deliberately, he lifted his cane from the earth. For a heartbeat, he balanced entirely on his own strength. Then, with painful care, he took a halting step forward. His bad leg trembled but held. Tears sprang to Emily's eyes. She clapped her hands together, joy bubbling up inside her. "You did it!" The look of fierce concentration on Santiago's face melted into wonder. He took another step, then another, each one shaky but true. When he finally looked up at Emily, his eyes shone with emotion. "Your medicines," he said roughly. "Your care. You did this?" Emily shook her head. "God did this. I just helped a little." Santiago's weathered face softened. Then he worked through your hands. He paused, considering something. I reckon it's time we rode into town. Emily's hands stilled. Are you sure? Those gossips need to see the truth with their own eyes. He gestured at his leg. And I made you a promise, remember? Heat rushed to Emily's cheeks as she recalled his words from that desperate night. Heal my body, and I'll marry you. She had not dared hope he would honor it once his leg improved. Besides, Santiago continued, his voice gentle, you deserve to walk proud in town, not skulk around like you have something to hide. Emily's throat tightened with gratitude. This man, who had once been so bitter, now stood ready to defend her honor before the whole town. When do we leave? Tomorrow, if the weather holds. Santiago tested his leg with another step. Best strike while the iron's hot. They spent the rest of the day preparing. Emily gathered her best dress and shawl, while Santiago cleaned his good boots and hat. That evening, they sat together on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. Are you afraid? Emily asked softly. Santiago was quiet for a long moment. Not of them, he finally said. Only of not being worthy of you. Emily reached over and took his rough hand in hers. They sat that way until the stars came out, drawing strength from each other's touch. Morning brought clear skies and mild temperatures. Santiago saddled his sturdy bay horse, while Emily mounted the gentle mule she had used on her supply runs. The trail to Silverton stretched before them, winding down through stands of aspen and pine. The journey took half a day, punctuated by rest stops to ease Santiago's leg. Emily marveled at the transformation of the landscape. Where winter had left bare branches and snow, now wild iris and lupine dotted the meadows. Yellow columbines nodded in the breeze, and the air carried the sweet scent of new growth. God's creation showing off, Santiago commented, catching her wonder. Emily smiled. It's like he's blessing our journey. As they approached Silverton, Santiago straightened in his saddle. Emily felt curious eyes watching from windows and porches as they rode down the main street. Whispers followed in their wake. Santiago dismounted first, moving stiffly but steadily. He offered Emily his hand, helping her down from the mule with formal courtesy. Then, leaning only slightly on his cane, he guided her toward the mercantile. Inside the store, conversation died as heads turned their way. Santiago nodded politely to Mrs. Henderson behind the counter, who gaped at his improved mobility. We'll need supplies, he announced clearly. And perhaps you could direct us to wherever Sheriff Kellen might be found? Mrs. Henderson pointed toward the courthouse. Usually takes his afternoon coffee on the porch there. Much obliged, Santiago selected a few items, paying with careful dignity. Emily stood tall beside him, refusing to shrink from the stairs. They found Sheriff Kellen exactly where Mrs. Henderson had indicated, boots propped on the courthouse porch rail. His eyes widened at the sight of Santiago walking. Well, I'll be damned, the sheriff said, then quickly added, Pardon my language, Miss Hartwell. Sheriff. Santiago dipped his head in greeting. Got something to say, if you've got a minute. Reckon I do. Kellen gestured to the empty chairs beside him. Santiago remained standing, his voice carrying clearly in the afternoon air. This woman here saved my life, not just my leg, though she healed that too with her medicines and care. She saved my soul from bitterness, showed me God's mercy still exists in this world. A small crowd had begun to gather. Emily spotted Reverend Calloway among them, his face darkening with each word. Witchcraft, the Reverend burst out. She's bewitched him with her herbs and false prayers. The only false things here, Santiago replied calmly, are the lies you've spread about her character. He turned back to Sheriff Kellen. "I need a witness, Sheriff. I made this woman a promise when she first started treating my leg. Said I'd marry her if she could heal me. Well, she did her part. Now I aim to do mine." A murmur ran through the crowd. The sheriff studied them both for a long moment, then smiled. "Reckon I'd be honored to witness such a thing. When were you thinking?" "No time like the present," Santiago answered. "If the lady agrees." Emily's heart soared at the simple dignity in his voice. "I do agree." Sheriff Kellen stood. "There's a nice spot by the river, under the old cottonwood. Private-like." They walked together through town, a strange procession. Santiago and Emily in front, the sheriff behind them, and a handful of curious townspeople trailing at a distance. Reverend Calloway's protests faded behind them, lost in the afternoon breeze. The cottonwood stood tall and graceful beside the river, its new leaves shimmering silver green in the slanting light. Emily and Santiago faced each other beneath its branches, while Sheriff Kellen cleared his throat. "Don't know all the proper words," the sheriff admitted, "but I reckon God hears the heart more than the speech anyway." Santiago took Emily's hands in his. His voice was rough with emotion as he spoke. "I promise to cherish and protect you all the days of my life, to honor the gift of healing you brought to my door, and to walk beside you in faith and love until death parts us." Tears spilled down Emily's cheeks as she answered. "I promise to love and support you always, to share your burdens and joys, to help you walk in hope, and to thank God every day for bringing me to your cabin in that storm." Sheriff Kellen nodded approvingly. "By the authority vested in me by the territory of Colorado, I declare you husband and wife." Santiago's kiss was gentle, full of wonder and promise. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of rose and gold, while the river sang its eternal song beside them. Emily's heart felt ready to burst with joy. As twilight gathered, they mounted their horses for the ride home. A few townspeople called out congratulations, their earlier suspicion transformed by the simple ceremony they had witnessed. "Ready, wife?" Santiago asked softly. Emily smiled, tasting the sweetness of that word. "Ready, husband." They rode home through the gathering dusk, the stars beginning to shine overhead. Emily marveled at how much had changed since that desperate night when she had collapsed at Santiago's door. God had taken her darkest hour and transformed it into this miracle of love and healing. Santiago reached across the space between them and took her hand. Together they guided their mounts up the familiar trail, toward the cabin that was now truly their home. Behind them, Silverton settled into evening, while ahead, the mountains stood peaceful against the darkening sky, witnesses to love's quiet victory over fear and doubt. The journey back to their cabin seemed shorter, sweetened by shared glances and quiet joy. As they crested the final ridge, the humble structure stood welcoming in the last light of day, smoke curling from its chimney, where they had banked the morning's fire. Santiago helped Emily down from her mule, his hands lingering at her waist. "Welcome home, Mrs. Creed." The name brought a blush to her cheeks. Inside, the cabin felt different now, no longer a place of refuge, but truly home. Emily lit the lamp while Santiago stoked the fire, their movements falling into an easy rhythm as if they had done this dance for years. The next morning, Emily rose early, surveying their domain with fresh eyes. The cabin was sturdy but spare, wanting a woman's touch. She opened her trunk and pulled out the flour sacks she had carefully saved from their supplies, studying their crisp white fabric. "What are you planning?" Santiago asked, watching her measure the window with her hands. "Curtains," she replied. "Every home needs curtains." He smiled. shaking his head in wonder. Reckon you're right about that. While Santiago headed out to repair the corral fence that had sagged during winter, Emily set to work. Her needle flashed in the morning light as she hemmed the flour sacks into simple curtains. By midday, they hung at the windows, softening the harsh mountain light into a gentle glow. She found a large glass jar that had held preserves and filled it with the first wildflowers of the season, columbine and Indian paintbrush gathered from near the creek. Their bright colors brought life to the rough-hewn table. "Lord above," Santiago breathed when he came in for dinner. "Place looks like a proper home." Emily beamed. "There's more to come." Over the next few days, they settled into married life. Santiago worked steadily at the corral, his leg growing stronger with each passing day. Emily often paused in her housework to watch him through the new curtains, marveling at how straight he stood now, how sure his movements had become. One afternoon, voices drew them both outside. 3 young boys from the scattered homesteads nearby had wandered up, curious about the smoke from Santiago's forge, where he was mending tools. "Can you show us how to do that?" the oldest asked, eyes wide at the sight of glowing metal. Santiago hesitated, then nodded. "Might as well make yourselves useful while you learn." He set them to gathering kindling, explaining how different woods burned, which were best for tool-making fires. Emily watched from the doorway as Santiago taught them to identify tracks in the soft spring earth, to read weather signs in the clouds, to tie knots that would hold true. His gruff voice grew gentle as he shared the woodcraft that had kept him alive during his years of solitude. That evening, Emily lit an extra lamp and spread her Bible on the table. "Those boys need schooling as much as they need woodcraft," she said. "I could teach them their letters at least." Santiago considered this. "Reckon their parents might agree to that. God knows there's no proper school for 20 miles. Word spread quickly. Within a week, 5 children gathered at their cabin 3 evenings a week. Emily used her Bible as their primer, teaching them to read from its familiar stories. Their eager faces glowed in the lamplight as they sounded out words, while Santiago carved small blocks printed with letters to help them learn. The Ute families who lived in the high meadows began stopping by more frequently. First came White Deer, a grandmother Emily had helped with joints stiffened by winter cold. She brought a string of smoked trout, her eyes crinkling with approval at the curtained windows. "Good medicine," she said, touching Emily's hand. "For the spirit, too." Other gifts followed: packets of seeds for spring planting, a beautifully woven basket, dried herbs Emily had never seen before. Each visitor brought something to mark the marriage, but more importantly, they brought friendship and wisdom about the land. Santiago found himself drawn into long conversations with the Ute men about hunting trails and weather patterns. They taught him words in their language for plants Emily could use in her healing work. Slowly, the isolation that had gripped the cabin for so long dissolved into a web of connection. Letters began arriving from Silverton, carried up by the children or passing traders. Mrs. Henderson wrote that she missed Emily's herb remedies and hoped she might make some to sell in the store. Sheriff Kellen reported that even Reverend Calloway had grown quieter in his accusations, especially after hearing how the couple had opened their home to teach the mountain children. One evening, as twilight painted the peaks in purple and gold, Santiago took down the Bible. His finger moved slowly across the page as he found what he was seeking. Emily sat beside him, mending by lamplight, as his voice filled the cabin with ancient words. "He healeth the broken in heart, and bindeth up their wounds. He telleth the number of the stars. He calleth them all by their names." Santiago paused, his voice rough with emotion. Then, slowly, he lowered himself to his knees beside their bed. Emily's hands stilled in her work as she watched him bow his head. "Thank you, Lord," he whispered, "for sending an angel to my door in that storm, for healing not just my leg, but my bitter heart, for teaching me to see your mercy in these mountains again." Emily knelt beside him, her own tears falling as she added her prayers to his. Outside, a gentle spring rain began to fall, blessing the earth with new life. The mountains that had once seemed so threatening now stood like guardian angels around their home, their jagged peaks softened by evening mist. Later, as they lay in their bed, Santiago spoke softly in the darkness. "You know what I see now, when I look at these hills?" "What's that?" Emily asked, curled against his side. "I see the Lord's handiwork. Used to curse these mountains for trapping me here after the mine accident. Now I see how he used them to keep me in one place until you could find me." Emily squeezed his hand. "He works in mysterious ways." "Not so mysterious anymore," Santiago replied. "I see his touch everywhere now, in the children's eager faces, in White Deer's knowing smile, in every sunset that paints these peaks. Most of all, I see it in you." Through their window, stars scattered across the velvet sky like diamonds on dark cloth. The cabin settled around them with familiar creaks and sighs, no longer a prison of solitude but a sanctuary of love. Outside, the night wind sang through pine boughs, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its mate, wild and free, but not alone. Emily thought of how far they had come from that desperate night when she had collapsed at Santiago's door. God had taken two broken souls and mended them together, creating something stronger and more beautiful than either could have been alone. Now their cabin had become a gathering place, a shelter not just for them, but for all who needed healing of body or spirit. Tomorrow would bring more children eager to learn, more neighbors sharing the rhythm of mountain life, more opportunities to serve and grow. But for now, they rested in the peace they had found, grateful for each breath, each heartbeat, each moment of grace that had brought them to this place. The mountains stood silent watch through the night, their eternal faces gentled by moonlight. And if, as Santiago said, the Lord himself walked these ridges, surely he smiled at what his mercy had wrought in this small cabin beneath the stars. The morning sun had barely touched the peaks when hoofbeats thundered up the trail to Santiago and Emily's cabin. Nika, the Ute trader they had come to trust, practically fell from his horse in his haste to reach their door. Emily had just finished setting fresh biscuits on the table when the pounding started. Santiago grabbed his cane, moving faster than he had in weeks. "Mining men," Nika gasped as soon as Santiago opened the door. Sweat gleamed on his normally composed face. "Down by the creek crossing. They're putting stakes in the ground, company flags." Emily's hand flew to her throat. Santiago's face darkened like an approaching storm. "How many?" he demanded. "4 men. 2 with surveying tools, 2 with papers." Nika accepted the cup of water Emily brought him. "They say they have authority from Denver." Santiago was already reaching for his coat. Emily touched his arm. "I'm coming with you." He started to protest, then nodded. They had faced everything else together. They would face this too. While Santiago saddled their horses, Emily packed a small satchel with bread and jerky, her Bible, and, after a moment's thought, the folder containing Santiago's property papers. Her hands trembled slightly as she tied it shut. "The Creator walks with those who seek justice," Nika said quietly beside her. "I will stay here, watch the cabin." Emily squeezed his hand in gratitude. The Ute trader had proved a true friend these past months, bringing news and trading fairly, treating them with respect when others whispered behind their backs. Outside, Santiago mounted with only a slight wince, testimony to how much his leg had healed. Emily settled onto her own horse, the same gentle mule that had carried her to town that first time. They set off down the trail, Santiago leading the way. The morning was cool and clear, mountain air sharp with pine scent. Any other day, Emily would have delighted in the wildflowers dotting the meadows, the way sunlight dappled through aspen leaves. But today, every beautiful thing seemed touched by shadow. They heard voices before they reached the creek crossing. 4 men stood among a scatter of wooden stakes, topped with small red flags that fluttered in the breeze. Surveying equipment gleamed on tripods. Santiago's jaw tightened as they approached. Emily saw how his knuckles whitened on his saddle horn. One of the men looked up, a clerk type with wire-rimmed spectacles and a city suit that seemed out of place in the mountains. "This is private company business," he called out. "Please move along." Santiago drew his horse to a halt. "This is my land you're standing on." The clerk consulted a sheaf of papers. "According to our records, Mr. Santiago Creed's claim to this property is invalid. The pension papers used to secure the original deed appear to have been forged." Emily felt the blood drain from her face. Santiago's pension papers, his proof of service and injury that had allowed him to claim this land. Forged? It was impossible. "I filed those papers myself," Santiago said, his voice dangerously quiet. "In Denver, 15 years ago, after the mine accident that nearly killed me." The clerk adjusted his spectacles. "Nevertheless, our investigation has revealed irregularities. The mining company has prior claim to these mineral rights. We're simply reasserting our ownership." "Investigation?" Emily urged her horse forward. "Who ordered this investigation?" The clerk's eyes slid away from her direct gaze. "I'm not at liberty to discuss the details, but I believe Reverend Calloway provided some initial information that proved helpful." There it was. Emily's suspicions crystallized into cold certainty. The Reverend's revenge had taken a new form, more subtle but just as cruel as his earlier threats. Santiago's face had gone gray. Emily knew he was remembering the mine collapse that had crushed his leg, the months of pain and fever that followed. To have his very service questioned, his right to healing questioned, it was almost more than she could bear to watch. "We have copies of all our papers," Emily said firmly. "We'll appeal to the territorial office." The clerk shrugged. "That is your right. But until the matter is settled, our survey will continue. The company plans to begin preliminary work within the month." "Preliminary work?" Santiago's voice cracked like a whip. "You mean blasting? Tunneling under my home?" "The company owns the mineral rights," the clerk repeated. "What lies beneath the surface is not yours, Mr. Creed. Never was." Thunder growled in the distance, though the sky remained clear. Emily touched Santiago's arm, feeling the tremors running through him. "Let's go home," she said softly. "We'll write to the territorial office today." For a moment, she thought he might refuse. But then his shoulders slumped slightly. Without another word, he turned his horse back toward the cabin. They rode in heavy silence. Emily's mind raced, trying to find hope in this situation. The territorial office could help, but their letter would take weeks to reach Denver, and weeks more for a response. Meanwhile, the mining company would continue their work, their drills and dynamite threatening the peace they had built. Nika was waiting when they returned. One look at their faces told him all he needed to know. "I will carry your letter to Denver myself," he offered. "I know the fastest trails." Emily hugged him, grateful beyond words for such friendship. While she prepared paper and ink, Santiago paced the cabin, his limp more pronounced than it had been in weeks. They worked together on the letter, choosing each word carefully. Emily's neat handwriting laid out the facts: Santiago's service record, the proper filing of his claim, the sudden appearance of these challenges just when they had begun to prosper. She didn't mention Reverend Calloway directly, but included enough details that clever minds might make the connection. Night fell as they finished. Nika promised to leave at first light, taking the letter and copies of their documents. After he left, Emily cooked a simple supper, but Santiago barely touched his food. They went to bed early, exhausted by worry, but sleep brought no peace. In the deepest part of the night, Emily woke to Santiago's shouts. "The timbers! They're giving way!" She sat up to find him thrashing beside her, caught in the grip of nightmare. Sweat soaked his shirt as he relived the mine collapse that had nearly claimed his life. "Santiago," she called softly, touching his shoulder. "Santiago, wake up! You're safe." His eyes flew open, wild with remembered terror. For a moment, he didn't seem to recognize her. Then awareness flooded back, and with it, shame at his weakness. Emily would have none of that. Drawing him close, she began to sing softly, the same hymn she had sung during those first days of his healing. "Be still, my soul, the Lord is on thy side. Bear patiently the cross of grief or pain. Leave to thy God to order and provide. In every change, he faithful will remain." Gradually, his breathing steadied. Outside, thunder rolled across the mountains, a spring storm approaching. Emily kept singing, her voice barely above a whisper now. "Be still, my soul. Thy best, thy heavenly friend, through thorny ways leads to a joyful end." "What if we lose it all?" Santiago's voice was rough with emotion. "The cabin, the land, everything we've built here?" Emily touched his face in the darkness. "We won't lose what matters most, our love, our faith, the truth of who you are and what you survived." She kissed his forehead gently. "Truth will win out, my love. God sees everything." Thunder crashed closer now, and rain began to drum on the cabin roof. Santiago drew her closer, and they lay listening to the storm's fury. Emily prayed silently, asking for strength for the trials ahead, for justice to prevail, for protection over the home and life they had built together. The storm raged on, lightning splitting the sky like judgment. But within their cabin, husband and wife held fast to each other and to their faith, knowing that morning would come, that light would return, that truth, like love, could weather any storm. Through the long hours until dawn, they kept their vigil, watching over each other's sleep when it came, sharing silent prayers and whispered words of comfort. Outside, the thunder slowly moved away across the peaks, leaving behind a rain-washed world waiting for sunrise. Days stretched into an uneasy rhythm after the surveyor's visit. Emily kept the cabin orderly, preserving what normalcy she could. Santiago grew restless, his nightmares returning more frequently. One evening, as shadows lengthened across the valley, he strapped on his gun belt. "I'm riding to town," he announced, adjusting his hat. "Got to face Calloway man-to-man about these lies." Emily paused in her work at the stove, worry creasing her brow. "Let me come with you." "No." His voice was firm but gentle. "Stay here where it's safe. Have supper ready when I return." He touched her cheek with calloused fingers. "Some battles a man has to face alone." She wanted to argue, but saw the determination in his eyes. Instead, she pressed a small Bible into his vest pocket. "Take this with you, for protection." Santiago managed a crooked smile. "Reckon I might need both kinds of protection today." He patted the revolver at his hip. Emily watched from the doorway as he mounted up, his bad leg stiff but steady. The setting sun painted him in gold and shadow as he rode down the mountain trail. She whispered a prayer for his safety, then turned back to her cooking. Hours passed. Emily kneaded bread dough, hung fresh herbs to dry, anything to keep her hands busy and her mind from dwelling on fears. As dusk gathered, she stepped outside to fetch more wood for the stove. That's when she saw it, a column of dark smoke rising from Silverton's direction, stark against the purple evening sky. Her heart lurched. Something was burning in town. Emily paced the cabin floor, fighting the urge to saddle the mule and ride after Santiago. He had asked her to stay, to trust him. But as night deepened and the smoke continued to stain the sky, her anxiety grew until it felt like a physical ache in her chest. The moon had risen when she finally heard hoofbeats approaching. She rushed outside with a lantern, its light revealing Santiago slumped in his saddle. Ash and soot covered his clothes. Angry red burns marked his hands and face. "Santiago." She helped him dismount, supporting him as he stumbled toward the cabin. His breathing came in harsh coughs. "Calloway," he managed between coughs, "set fire to the church himself, then blamed us." Another racking cough. Called me a crippled heretic, said we brought God's judgment down." Emily guided him to their bed, her hands gentle as she helped him remove his scorched coat. "Hold still. Let me tend those burns." She worked quickly, gathering supplies, clean cloth, her precious store of honey, healing herbs. When she reached for one of their few remaining clean sheets to tear into bandages, Santiago caught her wrist. "Use something else. We'll need those sheets." Without hesitation, Emily grabbed the hem of her dress and tore a long strip from it, then another. The fabric was soft from many washings, perfect for bandages. She dipped the strips in cool water and began cleaning his burns. "Tell me everything," she said as she worked. Santiago's story came out in fragments between pained breaths. He had confronted Calloway at the church, demanding he admit to tampering with the land claim. The Reverend had sneered, saying no one would believe a cripple's word against his. When Santiago pressed him, showing the Bible Emily had given him, Calloway knocked it away. "He had lamp oil hidden behind the pulpit," Santiago said. "Threw it everywhere, then lit a match. Claimed he saw me do it. Said I was taking revenge for the mine accident." His voice broke. "The mob came running. I barely got out." Emily's hands trembled as she spread honey on the worst burns. "The whole church burned?" "To the ground. Nothing left but the stone foundation and some beams." He caught her hand. "It's over, Emmy. They'll never believe us now." She met his gaze steadily. "Not while breath is in us." She tied off the last bandage, torn from her dress. "We can't stay here tonight. They'll come looking." Santiago nodded grimly. "Where then?" "The parsonage ruins." Emily was already moving, gathering essentials into their saddlebags. "No one will think to look for us there." They worked quickly in the dark, loading their mule with only what they couldn't bear to leave: Emily's herbs and medical supplies, Santiago's tools, their warmest blankets. Emily tucked her small Bible, the one she'd arrived with that snowy night, into her pocket. Everything else they left behind. The ride to town was slow and careful, avoiding the main trails. Santiago's burns pained him, but he refused to stop. Emily led the mule, watching him for signs of weakness. The moon cast everything in silver and shadow, making the familiar landscape seem strange and threatening. They reached the burned church near midnight. The air still smelled of smoke and wet ash where the bucket brigade had fought the flames. The parsonage next door stood like a blackened skeleton against the stars, its roof partially collapsed, but its walls still standing. Emily helped Santiago dismount, supporting him as they picked their way through the ruins. They found a corner where scorched beams made a kind of shelter, protected from view of the road. Emily spread their blankets while Santiago tended to the mule, hiding it behind what remained of the garden wall. "We should be safe here until morning," Emily whispered, helping Santiago settle onto their makeshift bed. His skin felt hot beneath the bandages, fever setting in. "Safe," he echoed bitterly, "in the ashes of God's house." Emily touched his face gently. "God isn't only in churches, my love. He's wherever faith and truth abide." She began humming softly, the same hymn that had comforted him through nightmares. Santiago's good hand found hers in the darkness. "I'm sorry, Emmy. I never meant to bring you to this." "You didn't bring me here," she replied firmly. "God did. That night in the storm, it wasn't chance that led me to your door." She kissed his forehead. "Rest now. Let the medicine work." He slept fitfully, while Emily kept watch through the long hours before dawn. Every noise made her tense. A dog barking in town, the creak of cooling timber, distant horses. But no angry mob appeared. No torches lit the night. In that quiet darkness, surrounded by the ruins of what should have been sacred, Emily found herself thinking of another night, another shelter. How far she had come from that desperate girl fleeing through snow, with nothing but a Bible and a prayer. She had found not just safety with Santiago, but purpose, love, a chance to heal and be healed. Now they were both fugitives, branded as criminals by the very man who had driven her to flee, in the first place. The irony might have made her laugh if it wasn't so bitter. But as she watched Santiago sleep, his bandaged face peaceful for the moment, Emily felt not despair, but a deep, quiet certainty. They had survived winter storms, old wounds, cruel lies. They would survive this too, not because they were strong alone, but because they were stronger together, and strongest still when they trusted in something greater than themselves. Dawn began to pale the sky. Emily torn another strip from her dress to re-wet Santiago's bandages. Among the ashes of the church, she found a half-burned hymnal, its pages warped but still legible. She rescued it, tucking it away with her Bible. Seeds of renewal could grow even in the darkest soil. Let Calloway think he had won. Let the town believe his lies for now. Truth would prevail, if not in man's court, then in God's time. Until then, she and Santiago would endure, healing each other, holding fast to their faith. Morning light crept across the ruins, turning ash to silver. Emily straightened her tattered dress and began preparing fresh poultices for Santiago's burns. They had lost their cabin, their reputation, their place in the community. But they still had each other. They still had truth on their side, and they still had breath in them. Breath enough to pray, to heal, to begin again. In the charred remains of the parsonage, Emily swept away broken glass and scorched wood with a makeshift broom. Santiago lay on their blankets, his burns still angry and red. The air grew heavy with coming rain. Thunder rolled across the valley as the storm broke. Emily scrambled to set out every tin cup and pot they had salvaged, precious vessels to catch the clean rainwater. Their meals had dwindled to beans and wild onions she gathered from the church garden's ruins. Despite their circumstances, Emily refused to let hope die. Each afternoon, she gathered the town's orphaned children who dared to visit. Using a stick, she drew scripture verses in the dirt among the ashes, teaching them to read and write. Her quiet voice carried stories of mercy as the little ones huddled close. Santiago watched from his pallet, his heart aching. How could she remain so strong? He felt worthless, a burden. When he tried to stand and help, his bad leg gave out completely. He crashed to the floor, pain shooting through him. "Curse you!" he shouted at the ceiling. "Curse you for this torture!" Emily rushed to his side, dropping to her knees. "Lord, forgive his pain," she prayed aloud, her voice steady. Grant us both endurance for these trials." Lightning split the sky, but her prayers continued, calm and sure. The storm's fury seemed to ease with each word of faith she spoke. Santiago felt tears on his cheeks. His own faith lay in ashes, while hers burned bright as ever. "I'm sorry," he whispered, broken. "I'm so sorry." A week passed slowly in the burnt parsonage. One morning, hoofbeats drew Emily to the window. Through the high mist, she saw a group approaching, Sheriff Kellen in front, with Nika and several townsfolk behind him. "Ma'am," the sheriff called out, removing his hat. "We need your help. Reverend Calloway's been caught trying to flee on the morning stage, had church money in his saddlebags, and these—" He held up a stack of papers. "Falsified deeds, including your husband's land claim." Emily's heart jumped. Santiago squeezed her hand as she mounted his old mule for the ride to town. At the courthouse, dozens of faces turned to watch her. Some looked ashamed, others curious. Standing before the crowd, Emily smoothed her patched dress. "I could speak of wrongs done," she began softly, "but I choose to speak of mercy instead. Forgiveness is stronger than hate. The Lord teaches us to pray for those who persecute us." A profound silence filled the room. Sheriff Kellen cleared his throat and stepped forward, holding out Santiago's original deed. "This belongs to you folks," he said gruffly. One by one, townspeople stood. "We'll help rebuild the chapel," someone called. Others nodded. Emily rode home through gentle rain, her heart full. As she approached their land, she saw Santiago standing at the fence, firelight from their lamp casting warm shadows. Tears glistened on his weathered cheeks as he reached for her hand. Weeks later, the new chapel rose proudly against the mountain sky. Fresh-cut pine boards gleamed in the morning light, and the simple cross above the door pointed heavenward. Santiago insisted on attending the dedication service, though his legs had grown worse in recent days. Emily borrowed Widow Jensen's wagon and padded it with quilts. She helped Santiago settle in, his twisted leg carefully arranged. The short journey left him pale with pain, but his eyes shone with determination. Inside, sunlight streamed through plain glass windows. The congregation filled wooden benches, their voices lifting in song. As the final hymn began, "Amazing Grace," something stirred in Santiago's spirit. He gripped the rough bench beside him, knuckles white with effort. Emily felt him trembling. Then, before everyone's eyes, Santiago pushed himself upright. A collective gasp rippled through the chapel as he stood, swaying slightly. With tears streaming down his weathered face, he took one shaking step, then another. "She healed me," he declared, voice breaking with emotion. "Not my legs. She healed me." His words echoed in the hushed sanctuary. Weeping spread through the congregation like a gentle wave. Sheriff Kellen bowed his head, hat clutched to his chest. Outside, a flock of doves took wing, scattering into the deep blue sky. Emily slipped her arm around Santiago's waist, supporting him as they walked together toward the chapel door. Their fingers intertwined as they stepped into the brilliant sunlight, two souls made whole by faith and love. The summer days stretched long and golden across the San Juan Valley. The new chapel stood pristine against emerald hillsides, its fresh whitewash gleaming in the sun. Inside its cool walls, Emily's clear voice guided both settler and Ute children through their letters, her finger tracing scripture verses as young eyes followed eagerly. Santiago's hands, once bitter with isolation, now shaped beauty from raw wood. He crafted sturdy pine benches that filled the chapel with the sweet scent of fresh sawdust. Up in the bell tower, his mending skills brought music back to the valley as he repaired the old brass bell. its clear tone carrying across the mountainside. Their cabin grew warmer with new love when they took in Sarah and Tommy, two orphaned siblings who'd lost their parents to fever. The children brought laughter to rooms once hollow with loneliness. Every evening, the family gathered around their table, sharing cornbread and stew while darkness settled over the peaks. Their voices joined in hymns that drifted out open windows, mingling with the wild songs of coyotes echoing from distant ridges. Santiago's limp had eased. He only reached for his cane when climbing the steeper paths. Each night, as stars appeared above the mountains, he would take Emily's hand and whisper thanks, not just for his healing, but for her unwavering faith when his own had faltered. Peace wrapped around them like a familiar quilt, settling deep into the valley they now called home. Autumn painted the San Juan Mountains in splendid shades of gold and amber. The aspen leaves shimmered like newly minted coins against the deep blue October sky. Emily and Santiago made their way slowly up the worn trail that curved along the ridge above their homestead, his steps steady despite the steep climb. At the crest, they paused to catch their breath. Below them stretched their small piece of heaven, the neat cabin with smoke curling from its chimney, the fenced garden where summer's last vegetables ripened, and the white chapel standing proud against the mountainside. Sarah and Tommy's laughter drifted up from where they played near the creek, the sound as bright as the falling leaves. "Remember when I thought this land was cursed?" Santiago said softly, shaking his head at his former bitterness. Emily squeezed his arm, remembering those dark days when pain had ruled his heart. "The Lord always knew better," she replied, watching a hawk circle lazily overhead. They made their way back down as afternoon shadows lengthened across the valley. Near the cabin door, they found young Jim, the telegraph boy, waiting with an official-looking envelope. "Special delivery from Denver City," he announced importantly, touching the brim of his cap. "Governor's seal and everything." Emily's hands trembled slightly as she accepted the letter. Inside, they found cream-colored paper bearing the territorial governor's elaborate letterhead. Santiago lit the lamp while Emily read aloud, her voice growing stronger with each word. The governor's elegant script praised Emily's example of Christian mercy during the church burning crisis. He specifically commended her courthouse testimony that had moved so many hearts toward forgiveness rather than vengeance. The letter went on to formally recognize Santiago's restored land claim, declaring his homestead rights unassailable under territorial law. They sat at their kitchen table, laughing softly at how far they had come from those desperate winter days. The lamp cast warm light across the rough-hewn walls that had witnessed their journey from strangers to family. Later that evening, Santiago settled into his favorite chair by the hearth. His skilled hands moved steadily over a piece of pine as he carved intricate scrollwork into what would become a new hymn bench for the chapel. The firelight caught the silver threading through his dark hair, and Emily smiled to see the peace in his expression. She sat nearby at the table, grading primers by lamplight. Tommy's careful letters showed improvement, while Sarah's sums were coming along nicely. The quiet scratching of her pencil mingled with the soft rasp of Santiago's carving knife. As the fire burned lower, casting dancing shadows on the walls, Santiago's hands stilled. His eyes grew distant with memory. "I've been thinking about that night," he said quietly. "When I made that foolish bargain, heal my body and I'll marry you. I was so lost in darkness then, seeing only what I'd lost." Emily set down her pencil and moved to perch on the arm of his chair. Her fingers found his, warming them. "The Lord had bigger plans than either of us knew," she whispered, her voice tender. "He healed your soul instead." Santiago nodded, emotion making his throat tight. through your hands, through your faith when I had none left. You never stopped believing, even when I cursed everything holy." Outside, the evening wind stirred through the valley, carrying with it the sweet tone of the chapel bells. Someone was practicing hymns for Sunday service, the familiar notes floating clear and pure through the autumn air. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the fires glow. Above the mountains, stars emerged one by one, burning steady and bright in the darkening sky. Each one seemed to Emily like a promise kept, a reminder of God's faithful love that had led them here. Santiago's thumb traced gentle circles on her palm. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked softly. "Taking that bargain from a bitter old hermit?" Emily's laugh was warm as summer rain. "Never. Not for one moment." She pressed a kiss to his weathered cheek. "Besides, you weren't that old." He chuckled, the sound rich with contentment. The fire crackled, sending up a shower of sparks that mimicked the stars outside. Through the window, they could see the chapel's white walls gleaming in the starlight, a beacon of hope in their mountain valley. The bells rang once more across the peaceful night, their clear tones echoing off the ridges. Like the steady stars above, they sang of faith rewarded, of love that healed deeper than flesh, of grace that made all things new. In their warm cabin, surrounded by the life they had built together, Emily and Santiago held fast to each other, their hearts as full as the autumn moon rising golden over the mountains. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.